Meanwhile, Paul Krugman is I mentioned this in the last hour. I just want to give you a little more detail and why I want to give more detail. Paul Krugman says that, yes, the white working class is about to be betrayed. The evidence of that coming betrayal is obvious in the choice of an array of pro-corporate, anti-labor figures for particular positions, key positions. In particular, the most important story of the week, seriously, people, stop focusing on Trump's Twitter, was the selection of Thom, an ardent opponent of Obamacare and advocate of Medicare privatization, as Secretary of HHS, Health and Human Services. This choice probably means that the Affordable Care Act is doomed, and Mr. Trump's most enthusiastic supporters will be among the biggest losers. Yes. And then he says, the first thing you need to understand here is that Republican talk of repeal and replace has always been a fraud. The GOP has had 6 years claiming it'll come up with a replacement for Obamacare any day now. The reason why it hasn't delivered is because it can't. Now, let me add to this. The reason why the Republicans have not been able to offer an alternative to Obamacare is because Obamacare was the original Republican plan. This is what Richard Nixon proposed in 1972, back when we had real news in the United States. And Teddy Kennedy fought. And then the Heritage Foundation in the early 1980s, at the beginning of the Reagan administration, I believe it was, came out with a working paper on this and said, here's how to do it. Mitt Romney tried it in Massachusetts, and it was relatively successful. He tried it in 2000. He ran for president on it in 2004, or he intended to. By that time, though, Obamacare had passed and it had become radioactive, and so he was trying to, oh no, I didn't do that, you know, but he did. I mean, that's the Republican program. The Democratic program is Medicare. Give Medicare to everybody. But the Democratic program couldn't get through, given the current Congress we had. So this is what President Obama put together, was basically the Republican program. Speaking of when we actually had news in this country, have you heard anybody breaking down any of these pieces of legislation lately? Back in 1972, when Richard Nixon proposed Obamacare, Daniel Schorr went on CBS News. Daniel Schorr has since passed away. Lamar and I had a wonderful lunch with him here in Washington, D.C. back, 20 years ago. When we were writing our first book on the JFK assassination, Daniel Schorr had some fascinating information for us. What an amazing guy and a great journalist. But this is how journalism used to be done in the United States. This is a clip from CBS back from the day. You can find this floating around YouTube. Here it is.
The administration proposal would provide different plans for 4 categories of Americans. For 150 million working people and their families, employers would be required to buy health insurance providing a basic package of benefits, eventually they paying 3/4 of the premiums.
This is number
For some
one.
20 million of the working poor and their families, the current free Medicaid services would be replaced by private health insurance fully paid by the government for the poorest, with a sliding scale of contributions for families earning more than $3,000.
That's number two, the second part of it.
For the 21 million aging Americans, the $5.60 monthly Medicare premium for optional doctor services would be dropped. Social Security taxes adjusted to make up the cost.
That's part 3.
For some 30 million domestic, self-employed, and others, lower costs by being enabled to buy policies at group rates from insurance pools.
Sound like Obamacare?
Deductions, co-insurance features, the plan is estimated to cover less than half of the average patient's health expenses and to cost the federal government less than $2 billion in addition to what it's now paying. By contrast, the Kennedy plan would cover an estimated 70% of health expenses through a system that would cost the government up to $60 billion, but including a lot of what patients are now paying. The Kennedy bill is straight national health insurance, financed by Social Security
the Kennedy
and
bill
general
was single-payer
taxes,
health insurance.
with no cost sharing, no cutoff point for the beneficiaries, bypassing private insurance companies operating through a presidentially appointed health security board. And so the line is being drawn between repairs on the present health system and a new federal health system. The debate starts next Monday, when Welfare Secretary Richardson is scheduled to appear at the opening of hearings of the Senate Health Subcommittee. The chairman of that subcommittee now, Senator Kennedy.
There you go. And then he goes to Kennedy and he gives a speech. And there's another one out there too where Walter Cronkite is breaking the thing down. I mean, there's a couple of them where they're breaking it down because that's what news used to do. And then in the 80s, during the Reagan administration, keep in mind this was 72, And then in the 1980s, during the Reagan administration, whenever any news media came out and said, hey, yeah, Ronald Reagan just lied to you, these are not facts, things like that, then you had this whole media infrastructure that was funded by these very, very wealthy families, by the Coors family and by the Bradley Foundation, the Bradley family. And a lot of them now, they're just foundations because the founders are dead, but they were live, live and kicking back then. And they were funding groups like, Brent Bozell's group, which I think was ACT, something like that, Accuracy in Media, AIM, A-I-M. And they would just yell and scream, oh, my God, Daniel Schorr, how dare he, blah, 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 blah. And this was a strategy that was called working the refs. You work the referees. You hassle the referees to the point where they just finally give in and say, all right already. And that's what our media did, is they said, all right already. We're tired of fighting with you right-wingers about what's factual and what's not. We'll just stop talking about facts. We will talk, and I challenge you, watch the news over the weekend. And outside of maybe Fareed Zakaria's program, look for anything that's factual. What you're going to hear is horse race. Who's ahead, who's behind? Who's happy, who's sad? Who's doing what to whom? But facts, details? Nah, not in the American media.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And this is how they get away with it. And Trump is just going full tilt boogie Reagan on us right now. I'm telling you, I saw this. I lived through it.